Hey everybody, I'm back to today with explanation on French Revolution secondary source SAQ that we did last week. Setting it up a little bit differently this time using some PowerPoint slides, so hopefully it'll be a little bit clearer. So the reason I wanted to give this SAQ is because it is a secondary source, and there's a 100% chance that one of the SAQs on your test is going to be some sort of a secondary source. Now the challenging thing about secondary source, and the reason we haven't talked a whole lot about them up to this point, is because you need to be able to understand two different time periods before these are really a great way to ask questions. So you can tell this is a secondary source because we're talking about the French Revolution here. But here in the explanation, I mentioned this guy's a French historian of the French Revolution, and that these articles were published in 1901 and 1904. So when you get to a secondary source on these SAQ questions, this is what you have to do. First of all, you've got a historian from history looking back on a prior historical event. So Juarez is in 1904, looking back at 1789 and before. And so what this is going to mean is that everybody is influenced by their time. I'm influenced by my time. You're influenced by your time. Juarez is influenced by his time. And so everybody's environment influences how they see the world. So our job is to analyze two different things with this article. First, we have to analyze what we know about the French Revolution, and then we have to analyze Juarez and what he says about the French Revolution and why he says what he says about the French Revolution. So, for example, A and B talk about our interpretation of the French Revolution. A described one prior intellectual change that influenced the events described in the passage. So that's all to us. What are the intellectual changes that led to the French Revolution? Second, explain the pattern of social changes that Juarez describes led to the French Revolution. So we have to read Juarez to understand Juarez and then explain what Juarez is saying about social changes that lead to the French Revolution. We'll get to that in a second. And then the last one is explain how an ideology of the 1800s influences Juarez's interpretation of the causes of the French Revolution. So the French Revolution, remember, is 1789, and for our purposes, it was Napoleon in 1815. Juarez is in 1904. And so our job is to analyze what has happened in these 90 years, 91 years, 89 years, sorry, now, that influenced what Juarez said about the French Revolution. So let's dive in. So first off, we have to look at the prior intellectual change. And so we can just go right to Juarez here, talking about the French Revolution, talking about the end of the 1700s. We got revolution, French Revolution. In other words, the question is what intellectual events led to the French Revolution? And for this one, you can take anything really that came before the French Revolution. The closer, the better. So the Enlightenment is probably the best place to go for this as far as intellectual movements. You could have gone with the scientific revolution, and some people did, because of the questioning of things. Some people even went back to the Renaissance. And if you mentioned the printing press and the idea that learning and literacy is on the rise, then you were right on. If you're talking about humanism and individualism, or a question of tradition, you're probably going to be okay. Though the further back you go, the more of a case you'll have to make for it. Because so much happened between 1600 and 1789. So the Enlightenment is probably, like I said, the best way to go. That's where we get people like, this is a great place to name drop. You could drop in Locke, and some of you did, well done. You could drop in Montesquieu, there's a vision of power. You could drop in Beccaria and the idea of rights, Rousseau and the idea of the social contract. You could have done that with Locke as well. Diderot and his questioning of hierarchy, Voltaire and his questioning of everything, and his constant fight for freedom of speech. Any of those things would have worked really well. And many of you did really well on that. Some people tried to throw in the class was a big thing here, and I think those people were getting the French Revolution in 1789 confused with all those other French revolutions that we talked about, 1830, 1848, and everything in between, right? So class is something that happens after the French Revolution. Before the French Revolution, we've got the first, second, third estate that orders society. After the French Revolution, that's when we get classes, upper, middle working classes. And so if you mentioned that if that class was a big thing, you probably didn't score the point. If you mentioned that the working class were fighting against the bourgeoisie, you really didn't score the point, because at this point in 1789, the bourgeoisie and the working class were on the same side, fighting against the aristocracy, fighting against the first and second estate. Because remember, the bourgeoisie and the working class and the peasants are all in that third estate. So that's why that happened. Question B, social change that Juarez described. His social change is that the bourgeois reached social maturity. And so you have to mention the bourgeoisie. And remember the pyramid, that the first and second estate are in charge. They make up about 2 to 3% of the population. The urban poor and the peasants make up the bulk of the population. And that in the middle, you have this bourgeoisie. And remember that in a triangle hierarchy, when we're talking about revolution, typically the first and second estate, they like things the way they are. It's like it's good for them, right? The urban poor and the peasants, they don't want things to change because they could starve and croak, right? And dead disease is not very good. If you have a revolution and you end up dead, what was the point? So really, we're looking at these bourgeoisie. They have enough money that they are socially stable. They're economically stable. The food supply is stable. They see themselves as equal to the top, but they're not allowed to be at the top. So the bourgeoisie is eventually going to lead the revolution. And so as long as you mention something about the bourgeoisie and them wanting power, them wanting to share power, them wanting rights, any of that stuff worked. And you scored a point, and many, if you did, I was really impressed with how many people answered this one and scored the point. Some people mentioned things like they worked that up, the people rose up. It's just too vague. And sometimes in the comments I put things like, who is they, or who are the people? You needed to mention the bourgeoisie specifically. Remember, on these questions, be as specific as you can without getting it wrong. So the more specific you can be, the better off. The more names you can drop in, the better off. You want to show the people who are reading these that you know what you're talking about. Now, there's a decent chance that the people reading these, like question 2 or question B, are not going to read question A. When I grade these, I read all the A's and all the B's and all the C's. And so don't rely on the idea that the person reading this has read your part A. And so if you say something like they, them, him, he, her, who, mention their name. I know it sounds repetitive, but the way they grade these, they just send out thousands of these things across the country, and people just sit there and click on the computer. So you get the point that you're not. And the most efficient way to do that is to send every one person all copies of the same question. So keep that in mind as you're writing. All right, the last one is the hard one. The last one is the most important question that's on this practice. You have to talk about the 1800s ideology that influenced Juarez's interpretation. And again, we're even 1904. So we're looking at the 19th century, or the 19th century. I got it right. And how those ideas influenced Juarez. And remember, I'm going to go back to this. Our job here is to analyze the historians, analyze the interpretations of the historians based on what we know about the events and what we know about their time period. So as I read Juarez, I'm looking for specific words that indicate to me this is a man of his time talking about somebody else's time. So how does Juarez's world influence what he sees in the French Revolution? So just 4 major ideologies that I think you can pull out of here. Marxism, communism, socialism. This idea here, the idea that the classes and the working classes are important, or just that the class in general is important. He mentions right here that the bourgeois had attained class consciousness. That's specifically Marxist term. He talks about power and wealth. But this idea that the bourgeois are now a class is very Marxist, very communist, very nationalist. Now, I know no one's going to say this because we didn't get too much into it. You can't say something like Leninist All right, remember Lenin becomes really popular in 1917 with the Russian Revolution. And so you got to mention something. You can't use that. You got to mention something from the 1800s. And even if you look at Juarez's dates, you can see that he writes before Lenin. And so he would never mention the person who hasn't happened yet in his time period. So that's the one danger with a question like this, is that you'll mention something that happened after the person wrote this. And so that would be what's called an anachronism. You can't do that either. So you got to be kind of careful with these. The second one, nationalism, that's squarely put in the 19th century. And he mentions nation. He says, on one hand, the French nation reached intellectual maturity. He mentions that this is nationalism, that this is a part of the process of the French as a nation, as a group, which the French wouldn't really see themselves as a nation. But Juarez is going to see them as a nation because he's from the 1800s. That this is a process of them reaching intellectual maturity. The third one, positivism. Remember, positivism is that idea that everybody progresses from religion explains things, to metaphysical things explain things, to science explain things. You can see that all over here. You got intellectual maturity. They want to apply the method of analysis to all of reality, society, as well as nature. We got the near infinite possibilities of development. These are all key phrases from positivism. At the same time, if you abuse positivism, which I think one or two people did, I'd be really impressed, and I was. So well done. And then the last one is going to be liberalism. And that one fits really well. Remember, liberalism, especially in the 19th century, discusses rights, such as wealth, and discusses power. So this idea that the bourgeois want a slice of power. So that would be something sort of like the vote. That could be something like suffrage, a legislature of some kind that they're involved with. All, again, very liberal ideas. Wealth, remember that liberalism is sort of this ideology of the middle class, of the bourgeoisie, and rights. This idea that everybody gets rights, that quality is very important to 19th century liberals. All of those things fit here. And so if you wanted to use any of these ideologies, I think you're spot on. And a lot of people did. Some people were kind of hinted at one of these four, and it was a little vague, so I couldn't quite give you the point there. But this is how you analyze a secondary source. So if you have any questions, let me know. We'll have another SAQ coming up as soon as I can get them all graded. All right, y'all. Stay well, wash your hands, and I'll be in your feed again soon. Have a good day.